how should we start this podcast? I'd like to introduce Emma Wilkes, Drowning Sound's newest staff writer, music journalist from all over the place whose writing I like so much and was very glad when she agreed to start writing for us. You've probably heard Emma on our dispatch from Glastonbury and from Reading. And today she's actually at home, not at a gig. How are you doing today, Emma?
For a change, I am at home, not at a gig, not in a field, sat on my kitchen table. But anyway, thank you again for having me. I'm doing pretty well, thanks. How are you on this slightly grey Monday afternoon?
Well, it's Monday now. When people hear this, it'll be Thursday, and Drowning Sound will have turned 25, which is kind of what this episode's going to be about. And it's going to be a bit different to normal. I thought I've been asking people the same questions, and I thought it'd be good to talk through some of the questions I've been asking people, which is to say I don't actually know how I am. I realised the other day that one of the questions I find hardest to answer is how are you? Which I think dovetails with my neurospicy brain of how do I feel? Do I feel dehydrated? That's not the question you asked me. Do I feel distracted? Do I feel overwhelmed by the state of the world? Do I feel the thing that I was just watching? And it's like my passion and enthusiasm for music, I think, also comes from that, which is probably why Drowning Sound started and how it grew to be the thing that it was. So it's only in recent years I've discovered why my brains the way it does. There's probably a few things for us to cover in this episode, but I thought, given that the Instagram post has gone crazy, and given that you've been trying to do it for a while, before we get into what the new mission statement's about, and before you quiz me on some of the questions I've been quizzing other people with, and I quiz you back, what happened last week when you met Jeremy Corbyn?
That's such a weird sentence to hear, because, you know, I'm here usually asking bands what we can expect from the next album, and then suddenly here I was interviewing the former leader of the opposition, which I've been actually trying to make happen for. I think I was discussing this with Sam from the Peace and Justice Project, who put all this together. I was discussing it with him, and we realised that it must have been about 2 years ever since he started the Music for the Many campaign that we've been trying to do this, because it just fascinated me in that he went from being the leader of the opposition to championing the arts, championing grassroots music venues at a time where it didn't really feel like there were many sort of big parliamentary voices speaking out about that. And I was like, I have to go and see what this is about and why this matters to him, in conjunction with their new festival Bulletproof, which is going to be taking place in East London next June, as like a little platform for artists to perform and use their platforms and speak out without any sort of corporate interests trying to silence them. So I was at the Grassroots for Gaza fundraising gig, which took place at the Shacklewell Arms on the 22nd of September. And for some reason, there I was sat with Jeremy Corbyn in the green room, talking about grassroots music. And it sort of clicked to me that actually, of course, it matters to him, because it intersects with so many other things that he talks about, whether that's to do with class, whether that's to do with equal opportunity, whether that's to do with expanding coverage of the arts in schools, getting pupils to have equal opportunities wherever they come from. And, you know, it was a pretty surreal moment, given that I'm used to interviewing bands and here I am with a politician. But we had obviously we did have a good chat. I did get some interesting things from him, and what was absolutely beyond my expectations was just how much traction it would end up having on social media. As it stands, we've had over 7,000 likes. We were literally just been in our group chat watching the numbers go up and up and up, thinking, are we going to get to 1,000? It'd be really, really good if we get to 1,000, and now we're at 7,000.
Yeah, because we've got a bit of a neglected Instagram account, which we over the last few months have been giving a bit more love. And as any musician knows, it's quite hard to, even if you've got lots of followers, like we've got 10,000 on there, just getting more than 1% of them to engage in something. And seeing that post spread and people engage with it, and people kept sharing. There's a one frame on it that's been shared to, I think, 400 or 500 people's stories, with him talking about music, arts, and culture. Need not be just the preserve of the rich and the wealthy and the middle classes, and that music is for everyone, which goes very much hand in glove with his Music for the Masses name for what they've been working on and this new project, doesn't it?
Yeah, they've been putting on some absolutely brilliant gigs. They put on stuff with Lambrini Girls and Enola Gay. I think that was one of the events they put on. I think Snakes might have been involved with something that he did an event with Zand at the Lead Mill, who was the first artist I ever wrote an artist bio for. And I was looking at thinking, God, they've got good taste. They've got some good stuff going on. So that was always obviously something that spoke to me in quite a big way.
I guess the thing that's strange for you and for me as well, like Jeremy was not just leader of the opposition, he was leader of the Labour Party. He's been this figure of hope in politics, people on the left, for quite some time. And I guess since Tony Benn has kind of stepped into this rare space of being someone that goes to speak at Glastonbury to tens of thousands of people, and not all politicians are capable of doing that. And I guess being younger, like Jeremy Corbyn probably would have been maybe one of the first political leaders you would have seen, and like when being conscious of what Westminster politics, would that be fair or not?
I think I was conscious of politics a little bit before that. I think my first, going way back, I think one of my first proper memories of politics in vaguely was the 2010 general election. And I heard people talking about the Conservative Party. I didn't know anything about them. I knew that I knew who the Prime Minister was, but I didn't know anything about what the parties represented. I think the properly galvanizing moment for me, beyond the 2015 election, was Brexit, obviously, because that was happening when I was in school. I might make you feel quite old here, as some other listeners here, but I was not old enough to vote for Brexit by a little bit of a margin. And
well, you are almost the same age as Drowned in Sound, which is
I'm Drowned in Sound years old.
Yeah. And which I think dovetails neatly, I didn't mean to segue like that, but into like our new mission and like where we're headed. By the time this comes out, we would have published the new mission statement, which, thank you to the bunch of people which fed back on the initial draft. It was very helpful. But it's not just a set of values or a new strapline or anything like that. I think it's been a while coming to really pull together a lot more of who I am and what my mission is, and like what I think Drowned in Sound can be and what it can become. And it's not just writing 3 out of 10 reviews of bad records. And similarly, it's not just endlessly recommending music, because as great as that is, most artists have got far more to say. As we've seen this summer, people really want to speak up for human rights issues they care about. They want to call out genocides. They want to speak up against the climate crisis. They want to like really defend grassroots venues and change the culture we live in. And I think it's preemptive, but perfectly so, that Jeremy Corbyn was interviewed last week, because the way that music and politics overlaps and fits together and is part of the same conversations that was how I got into music. And I think that's how Drowned in Sound's place in music needs to kind of be and continue. And there's this one line in our mission statement about music is upstream from politics, because there's this awful website in America called Breitbart, started a while ago, but most people would probably recognize Steve Bannon, the kind of henchman in the background of Donald Trump for a while. And their slogan was politics is downstream from culture. No, culture. I've got it the wrong way around. I'm going to have to like fact check myself. I should have had that in. Basically, I've done the inverse with Drowned in Sound. And part of the reason why the culture wars have been such a big thing is that the conservative right and the far right in America and around the world, so the Heritage Foundation, who wrote Project 2025, and lots of like Lee Anderson from the Reform Party. All these people have figured out that you can pick on culture, and things like Sam Smith being eligible for the Brit Awards because they didn't have gendered categories because Sam's non-binary, like, became this big uproar from your kind of Reform MPs that men are men and women are women and all that nonsense. And like the kind of turfy crew also could then get involved about it. And I think that music didn't know how to respond, and that to me was quite a big wake-up call. The music can speak up and speak loudly, but it's rare that we really see music being empowered, and it not just being, oh, there's a version of something a bit like Live 8, let's play a concert and have some people speak at it. And I feel like year round that those things should happen. And I got into music journalism through reading Hunter S. Thompson bits that were published in Rolling Stone. So it's like the clues always been there. The call's always been coming from inside the house. I just haven't been listening to it. And I think that your interview is the perfect example of things that we can do, dots that we can join, conversations that we can be involved in and bring music into, or bring music closer to a lot of these bigger conversations. So did that make sense?
Yes, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I think firstly, it's important on one hand to actually ask these questions of politicians, because obviously, that is going to be an issue that impacts their constituencies. And also, as I said earlier, it does intersect with a variety of other things. Culture is so reflective of the mood of the nation in so many different ways. And it's just becoming increasingly impossible to completely divorce music from politics, especially in times like these, especially when things feel so fraught, when people have turned to music for an answer, to find community, to find catharsis at the same time. I think the way that you sort of described your story there was actually very interesting to me, because I think for me it was the other way around. And I think for a lot of other people it can be the other way around, the music being your gateway into politics and discovering the existence of various issues and what people might be able to do about them. I think the example that I always sort of refer back to is System of a Down, because I think it's only because I know that band and only because I have contacts in that band that I know vaguely like anything about the Armenian genocide at all. And I think that might even be the moment for like somebody coming up in politics now, like teenagers maybe now discovering hardcore or something like that, may well hear about Palestine and the genocide and everything like that through music. I wonder if that might have happened to me if I'd been born like 5-10 years later. Even as somebody who kind of wishes I had a better understanding of everything like that when I was younger, because I didn't really hear much about the entire scenario until I went to university, and there was an occupation in the student union building for something related to it, but the details are still like a little bit fuzzy. But nonetheless, as I approach the end of my 5th year in journalism, my so-called journiversary, which is the anniversary of my first published piece, is next week. And one of the things that I do actually sort of wish is that I'd actually taken in more relating to news and relating to politics when I was starting, because having that in the background, you can't necessarily separate them. When you're writing about music, you're not necessarily just writing about music, because you can be touching on so many other different things, whether that's, topical related to the news, related to wider social issues in the background, especially when it comes into the things that bands are talking about and the things that bands are speaking up for. So absolutely, music being upstream of politics is such an important thing to be keeping in mind. And I think it can actually be, they shouldn't be separated, because actually it can be a very sort of a rich symbiotic relationship. And we're not at a time where we can afford really to be saying that music should stay out of politics. And that is a point of view that has actually never made sense to me either.
But also music needs politics. Like some of the bits that you've shared in the newsletter recently, it's like grassroots venues and the fan-led review of live music, which we're hopefully going to have a role in over the next few months. the music fans voice survey, which I was part of pushing out into the world, which 8,000 music fans took 15 minutes or more to fill in. It was a hefty thing, but it's provided people with an ability to speak to government and advocate for music. And so much of the out of control corporate world, like Live Nation and Ticketmaster, like that needs legislation. We do need a ticket regulator. Like the outrage people felt seeing the demand for Oasis tickets do the like Uber price hike, meaning that the dynamic pricing came in on a ticket that, yes, of course there was demand. The band haven't played for years. Why are you suddenly trying to charge me 3 times as much for a ticket that I've sat in a queue for, that I did not expect to pay 3 times the amount for? That's just corporate greed. And I think that we're seeing private equity buy up festivals, and not because they want to change culture, and they just want to make profit from it. And we're going to see like a lot more artists halfway down the bill not even making enough to cover their costs to play at the event, whilst big offshore investment firms make bigger profits. And with gender inequality, which we talked about on the podcast last week, it's like these are issues which people need to talk about, and issues that need societal change, not just change in the music industry. And the idea that music can help and change itself in the face of some of the biggest like investment banks and corporations in the world, like we're up against Spotify and Meta and Elon Musk buying Twitter, and TikTok's about to be taken over by the richest man on earth, whose name, the guy that from Oracle, Gary, is it Ellison? I want to say Gary, that's not his first name. This is called All Rich People Gary. Maybe that'll make it easier.
First there was Karen's, then there was Gary's. You never know. Maybe that will catch on.
Yeah. Which I guess is all to say that there's a lot that music journalism as a bridge to audiences, between the artist and the audience, and between the audience and creating wider movements, that I'm really hoping that we can be a key component in. And some of that is going to be doing resources, some of that is going to be creating space for artists to speak, some of that's going to be bringing people together, some of that's going to be the literal campaigning. So if you haven't read it yet, it will be up on Drown in Sound by the time this podcast goes out, so have a little read. So Emma, do you want to start asking me the annoying questions I've been asking the guests on this podcast?
I think while we're on this subject, I think it makes sense for us to revisit a question from season 2 of the podcast, which is how in this day and age do we define journalism?
So there's been so many amazing answers from guests on the podcast about this. Like, I think Yancey quoted it's the first line of history, or the first draft of history. Sorry, I should get those quotes right if I'm going to pull them out of my head. And for me, I think I struggled for a while to realize I was a journalist, and I used to just always talk about myself as a music blogger or a music critic, thinking journalism's a serious thing that requires research and facts and stats and qualifications and knowing what you're doing. And yes, I do know what I'm doing now, I think. And I think that there's various different elements that make up journalism. And I think with music journalism, it's difficult because reporting on new releases or interviewing an artist is different to reporting from a war zone. Or I spoke to Julia McFarlane in an episode, kind of just like, what do you do when you go to Lebanon or Gaza? Or she was doing reporting for the BBC, and like that to me is journalism, and it's something that I deeply respect and revere. And I've grown up obsessed with magazines. Like I've bought more magazines in my life than records easily. Like partly that's because I don't own that many. I literally can see a pile of magazines I've got here to take to a meeting in a few weeks. And idea that journalism is just people regurgitating stories from elsewhere really distressed me and upset me. And at one point, I just stopped Drowned in Sound doing news. I was like, we're just copying stories from elsewhere. We're not doing original reporting. Like, all we're doing is copying and pasting the Glastonbury lineup and saying Glastonbury's lineup revealed. It's like, yes, it is reporting, but it's not original. It wasn't. Were we adding to it? I remember in the early days, people criticised Drowned in Sound because our news had opinion in it and jokes and silliness, and we went beyond just puns in the headline. It would be like, I don't know, Deftones announced new album and then like 10 guesses as to what the album's going to sound like. I mean, I fell out with one of the worst musicians, Ryan Adams, when I did a news story about his book, and I made a joke saying, I wonder if it's up there with Bukowski. Like, it wasn't really a joke, but he took it as me calling him an alcoholic, and he'd been sober, and he just like wrote this rant about me on the internet, which I think that was the first day after I'd made 21 people redundant and started running the website on my own, and got into a beef with Ryan Adams, which was quite funny, in about 2008 or 9 or so, just after we'd launched The Quietists, and the backing that we had kind of fell away. So I guess in answer to your question, which is also my question, which is a meta way of answering a question.
Very meta.
I think journalism is a way of making sense of the world with facts and bringing them to an audience in a way that translates complex topics in a way that we can all understand and puts the context around them in order to engage people in a topic. And I think it's got various shifts and uses and ways in which journalism is journalism in ways that it's not. And I think that there are some incredible journalists who are also content creators. There are also some content creators who think they're journalists and are definitely not. There are also some campaigners who are also journalists, and there are also some journalists who are more like campaigners for an ideology. So I think that in the blurring, I think we need some clarity, and that's what journalism does. It brings clarity.
There's a lot of different intersections here, especially when I was sort of trying to find my way in journalism myself, and I was looking at all these different journalism resources, and it felt like I was at a weird intersection as a member of the music industry and a journalist. Sometimes I felt like more pushed into like a music industry sort of position than a journalism position, like looking for resources and looking for pitch call outs that didn't necessarily seem to be as much for music journalists. And that was quite like a funny position to be in. And it's a weird time for me to have entered this as well, especially since I entered this field during the pandemic, because I was at university. My first year of university was cut short rather. And I just needed something to do, because I would have become probably angrier and bitter anyway, even though obviously I was 19 at the time. And it would be quite hard you'd like to think it would be quite hard for a 19-year-old to be bitter as such. But
I mean, I was very bitter by the time I was 19, don't worry.
I was thinking maybe I was. I went through cynical phases, but anyway.
Can I throw the question back to you? What would be your short answer to what is journalism?
I was about to go there, but yeah, no, you throw it back at me if you like.
What is journalism?
What is journalism? I think I boiled it down to a couple of things, and I think they relate to each other. I think the first of those is asking questions. I think journalism is fundamentally about questions, whether you're answering what somebody wants to know, or whether and in conjunction with that, it's about asking questions of bigger things. Sometimes it's asking questions of artists, phenomena, systems, and then trying to make sense of the answers. But at the same time, when doing that, it's also about telling stories, because that is how we function as human beings. It's like, a few years ago, I read the Will Storr book, The Science of Storytelling, and he explains in incredible detail just how we basically almost live through story. We construct so much of what we know. We construct ourselves through story. We construct what we know about life through story. And journalism obviously plays a huge part in that. And I suppose you end up writing a different sort of story in a way with journalism as well. You're kind of creating a narrative I suppose it's like that quote about the first bit being the first draft of history, and that really spoke to me, because sometimes I do feel in my job like I'm chronicling things in a way. And, you know, the things that are written now are going to be looked back on, and you can see what exact, and you can make sense of what was happening in music and in politics and in the world at a particular period of time. And you can sort of start to look at it with hindsight and group it and sort of see, what can we call this movement?
Yeah, because like in a weird way, like indie sleaze has had a reverse history written over it, and it's like something I'm probably gonna do some coverage on in at some point. And like, often find it interesting when there's like hairstyles and fashion styles which actually are down to the economics of the moment, or like, I'm sure that the mullet has become big because it was one of the only haircuts people could cut themselves during lockdown. And like, when you actually like look at the aesthetics and then the sonics and the kind of everything else that goes around it, like, it's interesting. I meant to use the word accountability, but I don't know whether it's a journalist's job to hold people accountable, but I think it is their job to surface truths that power doesn't want surfaced. And I think that the being a journalist isn't being the friend in the conduit all the time. And I think with music journalism, PR people especially found it very odd when we were trying to hold people accountable or try to ask tough questions. Like, I think it was Raz who interviewed, I think it was Papa Roach, and they have a song about self-harm, and they kicked us out of the interview because we wanted to ask a question about it. Or it was Casey Chaos from, what band was he in? I want to say Coal Chamber, but it wasn't. It was one of those other. There was like all these. We got kicked out of some interviews for asking people questions they didn't want to answer, and like the PR people were really annoyed at us because, and it was like, we're a bunch of music fans, but we want to ask those tough questions. Like, there's a whole bunch of people that I'd want to interview, but I probably couldn't ask them about the things that I want to talk to them about. Like, isn't it Dave Grohl makes you sign an NDA before doing an interview? Sorry, if you have signed it, I'm not asking you the question. But because you can't, the first rule of an NDA is you can't talk about an NDA. But I think like he doesn't talk about Nirvana and he doesn't talk about certain other things. And it's like, it's odd that music journalism is kind of in that place. And we're now seeing politicians being interviewed by influencers. And there was a video essay I think I shared with you at the weekend, which I'm not expecting you to have watched yet because it was about 40 minutes long. But it was very much about how celebrity reporting is now, celebrities not being held accountable. It's often them being interviewed by their co-star, or them doing like the hot ones and not actually being asked questions and being framed as a human being, because the levity and the missed follow-up questions on some of the biggest podcasts in the world, when someone says something that's quite revelatory and someone's like, you've just completely missed a huge story because you've not thought about asking the follow-up. So I think I'm very much in the same boat as you, is that asking questions and being curious, but not purient. And I think a lot of people think journalism is purience because of the Sun and the kind of other rags in this country that think it's about raking the things up about people that they don't want.
Hi there, it's Emma here. I'm gatecrashing the podcast to quickly tell you about the Drowned in Sound newsletter. Every Wednesday, I invite myself into your inbox, with permission, of course, to share opinion writing and resources, tell you about cool things that you should be involved in within the world of music, activism, etc. I also bring track of the week and a little bit of hopeful news for you, because we all know that the news cycle can be grim at the best of times. Drowned in Sound newsletter every Wednesday in your inbox. Sign up now. Let's go for the slight sort of change maker angle. When it comes to the $450 million that Spotify gave Joe Rogan, what would you do with that money?
I've liked asking this question because it takes some of the guests by surprise, because we're talking about all the things they're trying to address and trying to fix. And I think the first time I asked it, it just came off the top of my head, and I was like, right, I'm keeping that. That's a great question because it got a really good answer. I think that was in the first episode of season 3, which was earlier this year, with Matt from Youth Music. I was just listening to him talk, thinking about all the projects they were trying to make happen, all the studio projects, all of the pathways for working class people to get into music, and then just thinking, wow, Spotify gave all that money to Joe Rogan instead. And what did Joe Rogan do with it? Turned out climate deniers, had Donald Trump on the week before the US election. It's like, I don't think there's many things you could say that podcast has done that's good for the world. I mean, sure it is. People must enjoy it and they must get something from it. And if people are listening to that podcast instead of like going out and beating people up, maybe it's a good thing. But I'm like, whereabouts is the line of libel there? Like, it's just my opinion. It's my review of the podcast, not necessarily of its listeners. Yeah, so how would I spend it? I think that music's biggest challenge right now is connecting people who love music with artists. It's never been easier to do it, but it's never been harder. And the depth of connection that people have, and like, if you're trying to promote a gig in Liverpool tomorrow night and you've still got 100 tickets left, you might try and go to the Liverpool Echo, but does that reach music fans in Liverpool? Maybe not. You would maybe try and go to the host of BBC Introducing in Liverpool because it's one of the only local radio music shows. Would that reach the average, I don't know, person that's owns a Beta Band record and a Deftones t-shirt and loves Phoebe Bridgers, and you want them to come to your show because that's the kind of music you make, somewhere in between all that? You wouldn't be able to do it. And like, so how do you sell the last 100 tickets, which is the difference between the promoter losing money, the artist gets paid more on a show selling out, more people there means more merch sold, means more drinks sold, which means a healthier profitable and kind of like no one losing money. Because if a promoter loses money on 10 shows, there probably can't be a promoter anymore, which means next time you go to Liverpool, you probably have to go with one of the big major gig promoters or a venue that's much smaller. And it's not down to the fact that you don't have an audience there. So I think that if I had that money, and if I had Taylor Swift's money, and if I had like the money that Daniel Ek has just spent on AI war drones, I would be spending it on building a new platform that connects music fans and audiences. Not just super fan relationships, not just direct to fan sales, not just flogging NFTs, which seems to be where hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent over the last decade. Like, not building something with algorithms, building something so human beings can connect. If I love something and I'm passionate about it and you trust my music taste, it should be easy for me to go, there is this incredible artist, like Eka Vandal is playing in your town. Please go see her. She was incredible at Reading. Like, I should be able to say Mannequin Pussy's t-shirt I'm wearing today. Like, they are touring near you. You should go see them. Or when you're about to queue up music for an hour, you should be able to click in and go, okay, there's these 10 people I trust. What are they all listening to at the moment? Make me a playlist of stuff they're all recommending. And I think that similarly, you should then be able to click, right, I want to watch something on Netflix tonight. What are the 50 people I follow online and trust recommending on Netflix? Be able to click a button and kind of go, here's just a feed of that. Not, I need to endlessly scroll through stupid memes and disinformation and misinformation. And the ability for us to connect and communicate as human beings has never been easier and it's never been harder. And I think there are huge problems for grassroots music in the infrastructure we've lost, and much of that infrastructure was media. And I think that part of my mission with Drowning Sounds is to try and become that meeting point of multiple fans with multiple tastes to trust a few recommendations a week and find some new things to love. And things like the Neptune Prize, like the idea of that is very much, here's just like 15 records. One of them you might like. If you've heard 3 of them, maybe you'll trust the other recommendations. And I'm not doing the give a shorter answer to the next question, am I? But I think that there's a big gap in the conversation about the crisis in grassroots music, I guess is what I want to say. And that is that running a grassroots media organization, being a content creator, being a podcaster, there is not funding out there. And so it makes it harder to grow an audience for what I'm doing, but it also makes it harder to spend the time researching new bands to check out, to invest in teams of people to have their eyes and ears out for really exceptional stuff. And that at the same time is the exact place where the artists I've managed when they've been on tour, I would want to be able to go, look, we've got a tour coming up. Can we do something with you? Can you mention on the end of the podcast that we've got tour dates? And you would hope through that, social media posts, all the other things, it would connect to an audience. And we're not seeing, there's not like an Arts Council grant I don't think I can get for media. There's not the equivalent of Music Venues Trust for media organisations. And there definitely feels like a big gap in understanding the audiences and reaching people. It should not just be grants being spent on YouTube adverts and Instagram adverts, because that money is not flowing back into music. It's not funding the journalists of the future who might be the managers of the future, or the content video documentary makers. It's not funding anything that builds infrastructure, resource, audiences, training, all the things that we need. So I guess my long answer and the short version of it is we need to be funding media. And social media and media are, to me, are the same thing. And I think that's why the community has always felt as much part of Drown in Sound as the editorial, and the community is often fed into the editorial, and in some ways change the ideals and the kind of who we are as an organization. I think over the last few years has definitely come from some of the most moving and powerful mental health conversations I've been involved in or seen. Really thoughtful conversations around complex topics with politics, and like those are people who found us because they wanted to chat about a new Reuben record, or they wanted to discuss discovering Phoebe Bridgers, or whatever reason they started posting on the forums. Top 5 dubstep songs was one big reason why a lot of people joined the forums, because it was the top result for dubstep on the internet at one point. Anyway, that was a very long answer to your question, Emma, which is also my question, which I'm keeping the meta circle going.
Absolutely.
Do you have a plan of how you would spend it, or should I not throw you on the spot like that?
Oh no, I've got a plan sorted already. I did make some notes. I was very organised for a change, and I think there is a little bit of overlap with what you have just talked about. And I think it's really important to start to understand music media as a form of infrastructure, as part of a wider ecosystem. And that very much spoke to me as well, because I've had so many conversations with people who work in music media about their frustrations related to budget constraints and the way that publications get run on a shoestring, when actually that wasn't always the case. And actually we do deserve to have publications, whether they are heritage titles or newer organizations. Everybody actually deserves to have that level of budget, especially when it gets to the point where more people can be paid for doing this, because there's so much out there. It's almost like the one career that people can do for no money, and then people will do, not strictly in a sort of a weird intersection of both hobby and work, but people also very much deserve to be remunerated for it. But I think that's a point that you've already sort of touched on, and I had sort of 2 other ideas. I don't know how far $450 million goes, so I'm just going to pretend that it's an infinite amount of money. And obviously, first thing that I think I would do would involve grassroots music venues. You could use that money to take a bunch of grassroots music venues into community ownership, which was something I know that the Music Venue Trust has talked a lot about when it comes to safeguarding venues' future, when it comes to the length of time they have on their lease, meaning they can't be evicted by a predatory landlord who might want to kick them out so they can put shops in there, or demolish the building more often than not to build luxury flats that nobody can afford. And so that is something that I would definitely do. The other idea that I had related more to artists and the challenges that artists go through. And I think if I'm not mistaken, maybe Chapel Roan has already talked about this in the context of providing through, especially potentially through labels or through other organizations, increasing mental health support for artists at any stage of their career, whether they've blown up on TikTok and they don't know how to digest the success, or they are going through some other meteoric rise, or they're being worn down and burnt out by a really sort of intensive touring cycle. And within that as well, I think one very, very big area that would need addressing, I think that should definitely be a lot of resources for, is addiction support, because as we all know, addiction has been obviously renowned in the music industry, widespread, endemic even. And I think that also both of those things can also relate to people, sometimes not just in the music industry itself, but before they come into it. I know plenty of stories of people who have ended up struggling with their mental health even before blowing up in a big way in the music industry, or people who were addicts before they came into the music industry. And often there can be a certain type of person that gets into music and connects very strongly with music, who might be potentially more vulnerable anyway. So I think there's quite a lot that's going on there. And
there was something that Universal did a few years ago where they tried to build in that infrastructure for artists. And like, I know there's the organization Music Minds Matter, which is sort of doing that. And like, you see, it feels like those are the things where profits from streaming in particular, working on a campaign is so stressful. You're like, the playbook that might have worked on a campaign 6 months ago doesn't work anymore, so you have to change how you do stuff. You're reliant on the randomness of the editorial team at Spotify putting you on playlists. Like, no one really knows which playlist to pitch for at Apple, and I'm sure there are people that really know, and like, you can but there's no like pitching tool. And like, all these different things where the stress of putting a release out, of going and doing loads of in-stores, radio bits, like, do you know what sort of audience the thing you've got? Like, was it worth the 2 hours, 3 hours of your time to go do it? Like, it's so stressful working on a record campaign, and often it's a 2-week window, and some people are trying to get in the top 40, so they're trying to like drive sales, and like, it's just so stressful. And so much of like, an artist maybe doesn't put a record out for 4 or 5 years and everything's changed. Like, some people with big audiences on Twitter, that's no longer a platform that they can reach anybody on. Like, it is so stressful. And I don't love the fact, I admire how eloquently people like Self-Esteem have talked up for the kind of mental health problems that come from being an artist and being present online and kind of speaking up about your music. I think that's something that I think we should think about how we can do more as Drowning Sounds, but also like basic neurodivergent like briefings before you do an interview. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is what you can expect. Like, do you need anything before we begin? Like, and even if someone isn't neurodivergent or doesn't know that they are, sometimes these things can make a world of difference. I've definitely felt it easier to do interviews when people have given me these are 3 of the things I'd like you to think about before we talk, or this is a little bit about who my audience are, so you know who you're speaking to and not just speaking to the host. And all of that, like, for autistic people, sending them a picture of the door and the entrance, like, so that when they arrive they know where they're going. Like, yeah. when you come in, we're on the 3rd floor, not even sharing. Some people don't even share the address, and they expect you to Google it and go to the right office. And
oh gosh, yes, no, that's as relatable as somebody with ADHD who stays in various hotels and Airbnbs, trying to find it and trying to get the right door and actually be able to get the door open and stuff like that. But just to jump in with what you said as well, and to briefly rewind, is that the way that you're talking about working on a record campaign, it made me think as well of all the people behind the scenes who are also going through that stress, whether that being like product managers at the label, or publicists. Especially, I know that lots of publicists have said they sometimes feel like they've what they do is something that they'll do a lot of work and then not really get a lot of thanks for it. And the thing that's kind of one of the very illuminating things for me when I come into the music industry is seeing the level of how hard people work, obviously on things they really, really care about, but also just how hard they have to work and the level of exertion they sort of have to put themselves through to be able to achieve a certain
Especially when
objective. We're all
especially on a
grinding. We're grinding hard.
especially on a global campaign, when you've got people wanting to check in from the LA office at like 10 a.m. LA time, which is like 9 or 10 o'clock off the top of my head, depending on summertime, in the UK. And it's like, that's a big ask for someone who's maybe went to a breakfast meeting to still be online at kind of 11 o'clock at night, talking to a different team about the same project, or like Saturday mornings when like all these bot accounts can upload songs to your profile, and like having to like chase someone down to like, and also the midweeks coming out on a Saturday afternoon, I think now, like because of the New Music Friday, like a lot of people find out whereabouts they are in the chart on a Saturday morning, so they then end up like booking more adverts because the chart position is doing well or not doing well, or like there's so much like phone calls at 10 o'clock at night about stuff. And like I've definitely experienced the bizarreness of I got chased on New Year's Day at 8 a.m. when I worked somewhere, and I was like, what? About something that I'd scheduled up and just hadn't published quite. I think it was publishing at like 8:30 in the morning. They're like, there's nothing out about this thing, and I'm like, it's 8 a.m. on New Year's Day. Like, I don't think I'd even been to bed at that point in time. So yeah, there's definitely stress levels in the music industry that are probably a bit off the charts. Right, Emma, we're about 50 minutes in. How many more questions have we got? Should we do them quick?
Yes, I think there's only two more really. So this hopefully
I said should we do them quick when it's actually been me doing all the rambling. So
yeah. So first one then, we've only got two more left. An album from the last 25 years that more people should hear is ...
I'm gonna save this one and I'm gonna do it as a video on Instagram. So people should follow us on Instagram to find out what my little buried treasure is, because I have 10 in my head right now. And
I know it's hard, isn't it? Because you have 25 years and hundreds, probably thousands of albums being released in that time. I was there trying to think of my own answer to this question. And there was one that I did sort of have in my head, but there were others as well. And I was like, oh, there's so many contenders for this. Which direction do I go in? You could go with something really new, something really old.
Yeah,
it's a very big scope.
I'm gonna save it. I think you should too, and we should publish them on Instagram.
Okay.
And probably in the newsletter too, if people haven't signed up and they're listening. That's at drowningsound.org. That's our little plug for the newsletter, which you can also go read Emma's great interview with Jeremy Corbyn from last week too.
Please read.
Yeah. So last question.
So let's talk about your thoughts, fears, hopes, predictions, general wanderings, anything under that banner of what music is going to be like in 2050.
So the answers to this question is not meant to be like a Rorschach test, but I noticed when I phrased the question differently, lots of people went towards the negative rather than the positive. And I started like you just did then. I think when I sent the question over to you, I think I put the like hopes and fears element in, not to reference Keane, but I think that for me, what do I envisage music being like in 2050? I fear that we will have a labor crisis so bad that making music is not something that people can do. I think that we'll have entire economies bankrupt by the climate crisis. I think that we'll had so much consolidation of corporate power that a lot of people are just on like global strike for decades. And not maybe decades, because I don't think that would work. But I think that music will be a lot less important to people if we carry on the path we're on. Asif Kapadia's 2073 really documents kind of like where we could end up. And I think that I fear that music would just be a luxury of the super rich, and the rest of us might scrabble around and maybe get 10 minutes of listening to some old thing. I hope the music will be almost as important as food and water, that people would have understood the therapeutic value of music, the communal value of music, that people that take over, the new overlords of power who hopefully understand the value of music and culture, really put it up there with medicine, and that we tell people you can work a 4-day work week, and you could spend a day of that making culture or visiting culture or going to a gig. Like if you want to go to a show on a Wednesday night, you can take Thursday morning off. And that's good because you've gone out and you've contributed to the economy, but also you've contributed to the betterment of your own mental health. I hope that the value of music is understood and that artists making work are really connected to their audiences and remunerated. But I actually think that if you are an oligarch, you should pay more. And if you're not, you should pay less. And we should have wage-related tickets and streaming, and the corporations could step in and cover the costs for some people. If I buy a mobile phone, it should come with music like Nokia used to do. Like, why should I spend all that money on a device and then have to pay for the music? Like, Apple should be paying because I'm going to use the device to consume music. Same with my internet connection, same with my laptop. Like, all of these things should be contributing to music.
But there is a lot I agree with there, and briefly had the fear of God struck into me there. I mean, as if I don't have it already. But yes, I just think that something that very much spoke to me was the concern about music becoming the preserve of the super rich would be a fairly unpleasant full circle moment, given that is how it used to be, as Jeremy Corbyn was talking to me about in relation to classical music. But that would put us in the same position that we would be in after like 200 years, which is not a cycle that I hope we end up in. And there is obviously so much that remains unknown. We don't know what that music is going to sound like. We don't know what people are going to be singing about, because, 25 years of history has not yet unfolded, and that will inevitably shape how music is going to sound. And the other thing that sort of struck me as well is that you maybe don't know how music is going to sound in the 2050s, because obviously we've been learning that a lot of what shapes music is the 20-year cycle, things from the 2000s circling around now. In the 90s, it was the 70s, in the 80s, it was the 60s, etc., etc. So we'll have to wait to see what music gets made in the 2030s to see what music sounds like in 2050.
Yeah, if you want to be rich in 2050, then you need to be the coolest thing there was in 2030.
Or maybe 2025, or maybe to be the coolest thing in the 2010s. Because I was literally thinking about this the other day, how vibrant culture was and how much was happening in the year 2013. I'm pretty sure there might be a BBC Sounds documentary about it that I swore I heard an advert for, and that was a really fascinating thing to me, because there was a lot of comebacks, there was a lot of huge cultural moments, there was a lot of talk at that period of time. So, those things might circle back around again. Maybe in 40 years on, people will be going nuts over Random Access Memories by Daft Punk, for example. Huge in 2013, huge in 2053. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, we don't know how people will be consuming music, because if you've got smart glasses, you won't necessarily and I think we'll have those, and they'll be gone by 2050. Like, I don't think spatial listening is going to give people the listening experience they want. But I think the idea that music is a soundtrack to things, an escape pod, I think could be really interesting. I also think that we still haven't found a better way of enjoying music than going to a small room and hear people playing a very loud guitar. And I don't think we'll ever lose that. And I think that that's one of the topics we're going to cover in the next few weeks. And there's something about music's power to touch our emotions, and like to like the way in which I love so much ambient music because it's so beautiful, but at the same time it's like a mist of calm descending. Like, I wonder if our needs from music will change, because at the moment music is sort of a background soundtrack for people, and I wonder if music's like an implant in you, it might know what you need more than you know what you need. And the choice paralysis that comes from trying to remember the music you like when you're typing it in, like, if an algorithm could be more attuned to, I can tell that you're starting to feel melancholic and nostalgic, so I'm going to play you something nostalgic that you loved when you were 17, and then I'm going to follow it up with something new that sounds a little bit like it, that I think you'll really love. And like, that's what a great radio host would do, or a great friend, and an algorithm can't do that. And I don't think that's where AI should be. But if it is going to be central, and like the idea of having an implant from Elon Musk is possibly the scariest thought I've had all day.
Yeah, I don't think I want to contemplate that any further. But let's face it, if Elon Musk was to do that, he would not be thinking about music, because I do not feel like he would be thinking about culture in that way. He does not have the benevolence to think about culture in that way, because he does not seem necessarily like he's capable of it. I'm going to sort of take a more hopeful stance here, because I am someone who is a little bit allergic to pessimism and does not really want to stare into the abyss, because I think we do enough of that societally anyway. But I would like to hope that I think humans will absolutely still be making music. I mean, we have been doing that as far back as probably when we were probably bashing on sticks and making drums and stuff like that. But I think it will still sort of triumph over AI, and I've always kind of been had that faith, because I do firmly believe people don't want AI music, and I don't think they ever will. Because
Human connection.
Exactly, that's exactly it. I don't think people want it. Something that feels soulless and derivative. I mean, some like humans can do that anyway, but it's not going to be soulless and derivative in the same way as AI would be soulless and derivative. And without that emotional core, then what are we doing it for exactly?
I would like to say thank you for stepping in to kind of shape this episode. But I think that for anyone that got to the end, I think we should let them know that we're working on quite a few different things over the next 6 months to a year to celebrate 25 years of Drowning Sound. It's not this podcast was not the celebration, as lovely as it was. I'm sure hearing me ramble at length about topics that I thought about but not thought about what I was going to say. I think that, yeah, I'm a very much a no notes person. I did think about writing notes. I did obviously send you the questions to refresh my memory. And then I was like, yeah, I should probably think about that. And then had a whole, my brain's been thinking about it while I was asleep or something. But yeah, I've got some quite ambitious plans, and we'll be revealing a bit more over the next few weeks and months. I think we've got some really good editorial lined up. We've got some interesting podcasts lined up. You're off to the Youth Music Awards to do a red carpet special. We've got another politician coming up, and a really special conversation coming from Swun Festival. I always hesitate to say whether I said that correctly. SWN, the Welsh word for noise, for coming from Cardiff. We've got a series of bits coming from Amsterdam Dance Event, ADE. I forgot. I'm sure the E stands for event, and that will have some quite big names on it. I have got some nostalgia-friendly disc favourites from the past. Going to do a couple of episodes about probably touching on indie sleaze, and how it never existed, with people who've been erroneously filed under that. I still have interview requests out with very predictable people that I've wanted to interview for most of the last 25 years. I have still never met Bjork, even though she's admitted in reading Drowning Sound. I have no idea whether I'll get an interview with Bjork because she is quite elusive. I still dream of interviewing Trent Reznor again because we had a great chat about the Social Network soundtrack, and I think he is one of the most thoughtful, kind of inventive, visionary artists in the world, and also makes some of my favorite music, so why wouldn't I want to interview him again? I've put lots of requests out for some bigger conversations over the next 6 months. Was there anything I forgot to say, Emma? Not that I told you what I was going to say in advance.
I cannot read your mind. I mean, maybe I'll learn that to do that eventually, but for now I can't. But
you've got some fun newsletter ideas coming up as well, haven't you?
I do have fun newsletter ideas. You know, there's always something rattling around in there. I will always have things to say, inevitably. And if you've read anything that I have done so far in my short tenure so far, then thank you so much. And if we haven't been acquainted before, hello. Well, you've met me. You've met me now. You've heard me talk. So
how are you going to top interviewing Jeremy Corbyn though?
The joke that I'm making, I'm actually going to say it out loud, just to see if we can throw it into the ether, just for manifestation's sake. The joke that I've made to people is I have made the joke about taking Zara Sultana to a hardcore show. Zara Sultana, if you're listening.
It's like she'd be great. I really loved, there was a piece in Huck magazine where she talked about her love of BTS. And she DJs. She won't be DJing at Labour conference this year as she's no longer a member of the Labour Party, but yeah, she's like apparently big music fan. We're gonna then what do you do? Like, you just have to keep setting the bar. Like, it's like, do you take AOC to an LCD show? But have to just keep it going. I'm gonna leave that one in the minds and the imaginations of our listeners. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining the team, because it's exciting. We have a team now. It's not just me.
We have a team. Yes. I'm so excited to be here, as ever.
and I've got to do the weekly thank you to Josh Craggs for editing this, because
thanks, Josh.
Neither of us want to sit here and stare at our own faces and listen to our own voices editing stuff, which, going back to the mental health bit, is one of the reasons why the podcast became less consistent, was literally me just not wanting to sit down and spend my Sunday watching myself on screen and editing videos for YouTube and listening to my own voice. Although you might think I like the sound of my own voice based on how much I've spoken throughout this episode. I'm a podcaster. I'm meant to ramble and chat, and that's Adam Buxtonism almost, with a gap in the middle. I have been Sean Adams. You have been Emma Wilkes. This has been the Drown and Sound podcast. And you have been you. Thank you for listening. Bye.